Milk bottles. In a frontier town, an older man owned the only general store. In good times, his store was the busy center of life in the town. But times had been tough lately, so his customers were few and far between. One day, a young woman entered his store holding 2 empty milk bottles. The woman's pale face was drawn with distress. The storekeeper knew everyone in the town and the surrounding area, but this young woman he had never seen before. Silently, she approached his counter, where she put down the 2 empty milk bottles and 2 pennies. Her look was so mournful and desperate that he didn't point out that this was not enough money. Instead, he reached behind him, took 2 full bottles out of the icebox, and placed them next to the empty ones. The woman picked the bottles up, and with barely a nod of acknowledgement, left the store. The next day, she entered his store again. Once more, she placed 2 empty milk bottles on his counter and turned her pale, stricken face upon him. This time, there were no pennies at all, but once more, the storekeeper placed 2 full bottles on the counter, and as before, the young woman left the store as silently as she had entered it. That afternoon, the storekeeper inquired of various townfolk if they knew who the young woman was. To his surprise, no one knew a thing about her. She was a complete stranger. Later in the evening, his neighbors speculated that maybe she was the daughter of one of those travelers camped by the river north of town. The neighbor cautioned that most of the townspeople had stayed away from the camp because it had been plagued by illness, and several of its members had not survived. But she had heard that the surviving members of the group had recently moved on. The following morning, the same young woman entered his store holding empty milk bottles. He replaced them with filled ones and tried to engage the woman in conversation, but she only nodded silently and left the store. This time, the man followed her. She walked down the main street and out of town, heading north. He followed her along the river and into the town's makeshift graveyard. He was shocked into stillness when she disappeared near a large, rough wooden cross. Cautiously, he approached the grave to see where she might have gone. As he stood over the fresh burial mound, he heard a baby's cry. He realized the wail was coming from the earth beneath his feet. He ran back to town and returned to the graveyard with people and shovels. They dug furiously, and when the coffin was finally hauled out and opened, the man saw the woman who had visited his store lying dead. Her cold, stiff arms cradled a small baby. The 2 milk bottles lay empty by her side. The baby was still alive.